I grew up in West Texas, where the wind blew 365 days a year. And in a little town in North Texas, Canyon, Texas. I finished college when I was 19, so I was ready to do something else. So I started taking flying lessons. And when I was 8 years old, my dad decided to take me out and show me one of the old barnstormers that was flying through there. The barnstormers were the pilots, some of the pilots in World War I. And they would fly around and land out at these little towns, and people would come out and see the airplane, and then they would take people up for, I don't know, it was 50 cents or $1. And my dad called my mother and said to get me ready. He was taking me somewhere, but he didn't tell her what we were going to do. She probably wouldn't have liked it too much. But we went out, and I was enthralled with the airplane. So he was taking people up. My dad asked me if I wanted to go up, and I said, sure. So they scrounged around and got lots of pillows so I could at least see out. This was open cockpit, Stearman. And I got to fly around for 15 or 20 minutes. And that was the greatest thing I'd ever done. And I guess in the back of my mind, I decided I was going to be a pilot. So I started taking lessons right after I got out of college in 1941. And I was out taking flying lessons of sometime one day, and read in Flying Magazine that they were starting an experiment taking women pilots into what was then the Army Air Corps, and we had to have at that time we had to have our private pilot license and 75 hours of flying time. And it takes quite a while to get 75 hours. So I had gotten my private license and my 75 hours already. So I wrote a note to Jacqueline Cochran, who was a famous aviatrix, she and Amelia Earhart during that era, and was to go to and went to Fort Worth for an interview with Cochran, and was accepted in the 7th class of the Women Airforce Service Pilots. We trained at Sweetwater, Texas, which was still in North Texas without any trees or a flat country. I think we have somebody here that has relatives in Sweetwater, maybe grew up there, I don't know. Anyway, that was it was a good place to learn to fly because of the weather and because of the terrain. So I went down for the interview, and I was accepted into the 7th class. The first girls had been at Houston, Texas, and then Cochran and I got a venture field in Sweetwater, Texas. And we were then and now, we were the only Air Corps base of all women. So to begin with, we had quite a few of the guys had emergency landings at Avenger Field. But Jacqueline Cochran put a stop to that right quick. So we called it Cochran's Convent. And we had primary, basic, and advanced, had the same training as the men. But it took them 9 months and we graduated in 6 months. And of course, we didn't take any leave between primary, basic, and advanced, so we got out a little sooner. During primary, we flew the PT-19, and in basic, we did the basic trainer, still single engine, and in advanced, we flew the T6, the North American's T6, and the C-78, which was twin engine. And I went in May of '43 and graduated in November. And there were 20 of the girls in my class, 20 chosen to go to B-25 school because they had never all checked out in B-25 school before. There were a few girls flying in the Ferry Command, and it's possible they had already checked out in them, I'm not sure, but anyway, they hadn't gone through the training, the transition where we got another instrument rating and our first pilot rating in the B-25, which was the bigger twin engine bomber. And of course, 25 is kind of famous because that was what General Doolittle flew over Japan and flew the B-25 off of the Navy, Navy aircraft boat. So we graduated from B-25 school in February, and with almost 200 hours and first pilot rating in the B-25. And 10 of us were sent to Biggs Field at El Paso, Texas, and the other 10 were sent to March Field at Riverside. We were in tow target squadron. We were towing targets behind B-25s, B-26, and we were training the men at Fort Bliss, the ground troops of the Air Corps, for combat. We only flew here in the States to relieve the men to go into combat. I think when Pearl Harbor happened, I think we only had about 800 pilots in the whole Air Force. And so we were an experiment because all the men in Congress said women don't fly, so we went in to prove them wrong. And the first class, I think they had to have either 200 or 500 hours to get in, but they lowered the rates, but we had to be 21. So it was an absolute fantastic experience. In the early mornings, we would fly strafing missions over the convoys that were going out in the deserts that meant training. And we flew, for our strafing missions, we flew the P-47 and the two Navy Helldivers, the V-24, Douglas Dauntless, and the A-25, the Curtiss Helldiver. And that was a lot of, we kind of enjoyed that. We went right over the top of their heads, and hopefully they were eating breakfast, because then they had to throw their breakfast away and hit the dirt. So we got as close as possible. And one night we were towing a target when we flew night missions. That was they were shooting at the target, so the boys had to get the targets in the searchlights, and hopefully they didn't get us in the searchlights, because so one night we were towing the target, and the flak started, and these were real bullets too, and started breaking in front of us, and we had to do some evasive action to get out of the way, and call the base over at Fort Bliss and told them we were cutting the target and going home. When they learned how to shoot better, we'd come back and fly for them again. So it had its exciting moments, but fortunately we only lost one girl at Biggs Field. She had just graduated from and gotten her wings in one of the later classes. She didn't have as much experience as the rest of us. There were 17 of us at Biggs Field, and she wanted to check out on the Douglas Dauntless, and the throttle was over here, and the pulling up the landing gear was on this side. So, but right by it was the thing to pull for the dive flaps. And that was supposed to be locked, but evidently on this one that she was flying, it wasn't wired shut, so it couldn't be touched. And she pulled that rather than pulling up the land gear, and of course it just went right in. And that was pretty traumatic for all of us. But so our commanding officer for our squadron, the 6th Total Target Squadron, we all had to go up that day. So it was just one of those things, that's what they did. So there were some pretty exciting things happen off and on, but it was a fantastic thing for us to get, all of us, to get to fly the big airplanes. And we had no idea that we were making history or being pioneers or anything. We just all loved to fly. And one great experience for me was my first night solo, to be up in the air all by myself and nothing but the stars. And that was quite an experience. Now, way back when they decided to do this, there were 25,000 women that applied, and there were 1,800 accepted. And out of the 1,800, there were 1,074 graduated. And we were technically with civil service. So although everybody thought we were military, because we went by the Army, the orders and all of the discipline and everything that they had. But we weren't. We were civil service. So we fought for 30 years. When we were deactivated in 1944, December 20th, 1944, we were not given a honorable discharge, or it was, we're done with you, go home deal. And so Barry Goldwater, when he got into Congress, he realized that, because he flew in the Ferry Command and flew with a lot of the girls. So he introduced the bill to get our veteran status, which finally passed. It had been voted on while we were in 1944, when we were still flying, but it was voted down by three votes in Congress. And that's when Cochran and General Arnold said, okay, the girls are going home. And so we were just discharged and went home. So we finally got our honorable discharge in 1977. So we are now veterans. But everybody during World War II felt obligated to do what they could, and we felt we were doing a duty, but we all thought it was an opportunity for us to learn to fly and to serve our country. So that's about my story. Well, I have one more story to tell you that you might enjoy. My brother, my older brother, 4 years older than me, was in the Air Corps, and he was he flew on. Was not a pilot, but he was a crew chief on the B-25s in Sicily. So he was toward the end of the war. He was sent home. We were still flying then, and was discharged and had to come to El Paso. Why, I don't know, but that's where he was mustered out. And so I got permission from our commanding officer to take him home to Amarillo Air Force Base. It was the closest. To take him home after he finished all his paperwork in El Paso. And of course, in a B-25, which he'd been flying in. And of course, I thought that was very nice of me to do that. But he said, oh no, don't worry about it, I can go home on a bus. I said, no, you're going home, I'm going to fly you home. So he wasn't too thrilled about it, I don't think, but so another gal and I, because that was, we had a co-pilot, of course. So he got on the plane, and he was not too happy camper getting on the plane. I think he thought that was his last day on the earth. And So my friend Frances Thompson, who was a rancher's daughter from Arizona, she and I flew him home, and we decided that we had to give him a couple thrills anyway, that we would do the Doolittle takeoff, which was backing up to the end of the runway there and holding the brakes and running both engines up to full speed and then turning loose the brakes. So a B-25 can get off the runway pretty fast when you do that. And it can be kind of a shock, I guess, to whoever's riding with us. But he was sitting where the crew chief always sat, right behind the pilots, and not smiling or anything. I think he was not too happy a camper. So when we got, a canyon is about 17 miles from Nell Air Force Base. So when we got there, I turned to Tommy and I said, I think we should buzz the hometown, don't you? And she said, yes, I think we should do that. And he spoke up and said, oh, we don't have to do that. Well, we can pay attention to him. So we kind of went around and went right down Main Street. A lot of other people probably weren't too happy about it either. But, and then we just Johndale up and went on to the Emerald Air Force Base. Well, you have never seen anybody so happy to get off an airplane as he was that day. So that was, and that was quite a thrill for Tommy and me. So that's it, folks. I'll turn it over to you now.
That's a great story.